Ghost Stories is a British horror movie co-directed by Jeremy Dyson and Andy Nyman, making their debut feature-length film about a supernatural debunker, Professor Goodman, played also by Nyman, who is challenged by his idol Charles Cameron to prove him wrong about 3 supernatural cases that he could not explain. Goodman is one of those people that only take things at face value and only believes what he can see or prove. This leads him to have to meet and interview 3 people about a paranormal experience to try and explain what happened. Now, this is where things get interesting, because within this feature-length film, we get 3 short films, all focusing on different aspects of the paranormal. It does feel like these 3 experiences are live-action tellings of Reddit scary stories that you can find narrated on YouTube by creators like Buster and Lazy Masquerade. The best of these 3 involve a night guardsman. This scene is an absolute masterclass in how to build audience tension, with the lighting and the cinematography and the soundtrack all coming together to create this tense atmosphere. There are cliches of a jump scare every once in a while, but they are not overused, and there are those moments where you wonder why that character is doing a certain thing. But the way the scene is crafted is intense to the point where I could actually feel my heart beating harder than it normally would. Now, this scene is story number 1, so here I am thinking that it's only going to get more scary from this point onwards. Unfortunately, that is the peak of how terrifying things get, as they seem to grow more tamer in with each story that passes by. And this does make sense once we reach the film's conclusion, but apart from that and one particular performance, this film lacks in the scare category. Also, this film does manage to do some clever, subtle foreshadowing, which all leads up to the final act. Watching this, I thought it was going to be a simple anthology movie with a basic thread to connect it together, that will ultimately end with Goodman accepting that ghosts do exist. Now, without spoiling anything, I will say this film doesn't go as cut and paste as that format, leaving the 3rd act a pleasant surprise. However, like Mother, I do feel like this will divide people, as I myself am still unsure about how I feel about it. On the one hand, it is brilliant how all the little clues do come together, but at the same time, the whole build-up feels way too elaborate for how it ends up in the end of the film. Like last year's The Ritual, the film builds up so well in the first 80%, but then fails to stick the landing. Whilst Ghost Stories did not infuriate me the way The Ritual did, it does feel like the writers did not know how to finish the movie. In terms of performances, Nyman is definitely serviceable, with Martin Freeman, who plays one of the interviewees, as charming as ever, but my MVP of this flick has to be the second interviewee, Stephen, played excellently by Alex Lawther, who also plays James in End of the Effing World, and an adult Christopher Robin in Goodbye Christopher Robin. Jesus Christ, this kid is going places. A star in the making, he is absolutely terrifying and unsettling in his performance, so much so that he is more unnerving than the supernatural incident he talks about in the film. How these interactions worked was Goodman would speak to the character and then it would cut to the story, and the story we got with Simon actually felt a lot more safer than the actual interaction we did get with Simon. The basement and Simon's bedroom are the standout scenes in this movie, and I cannot wait to see what this kid does next. Now, on the flip side, Martin Freeman's story feels more tame in comparison to the other 2, and the film after that starts to take a more philosophical twist, where everything is a question. And whilst I do appreciate a movie that challenges its audience, I don't believe this movie was the right kind to do that. And it does get a little confusing. We finally get some development with Goodman in the final third after seeing him be dismissive and work focused for most of the film, but the conclusion comes so out of left field and does more harm than good in my honest opinion. Now, saying that, I do love how the film calls out the "I'm sorry" sentiment that lacks any meaning at this point when it comes to understanding someone else's grief, and that is arguably the thing that Nyman is best at in terms of performance in this film. But away from the performances, let's talk the technical aspects. The sound design is really well done. Everything from the build-ups to the complete silence during awkward scenes, it all played really well and amplifies what is needed. Even the jump scares are not ridiculously loud, and for the most part, you see what is intended to scare you first before the sound even comes into play. As for the cinematography, it is outstanding what Birkland does, and the movements and framing really help emphasize the space and the dark corners. That basement scene works just for the fact there is so much space around the person. You are constantly expecting someone to appear out of the shadows, which really does the scene a service and is one of the more constant things throughout the movie. Unfortunately, I feel like this would have worked better as a short story, because in terms of what we are supposed to care about in the film, it lacks any kind of heart and soul to keep you invested. Goodman as a character is bland, and the final third really derails everything built up in the previous periods. Also, there is a distinct lack of stakes in this. As you know, each person telling their story survives, so whilst the terror is built well, you know that they're okay and they're going to make it through just fine. And certain moments feel like they are just there for the sake of shock factor. And the final crux of the movie, while clever, does come across a little flat, and you are left with more questions the more you think about it. Overall, Ghost Stories is a fine piece of British horror, but it fails to reach the height of such British horrors as The Descent and 28 Days Later. However, the basement scene and Lawther's performance alone are worth the price of admission, and any horror junkie should see this, as this deals with different aspects of the paranormal really well. In terms of a rating, it needs more sugar, but this is a solid film nonetheless. Anyway, Ghost Stories. Has anyone seen it? Let me know down in the comments below. Hit that round subscribe button for more reviews coming all the time. This is That Spikehead Podcast.